If you're looking for inspired, faith-filled movies that will not only motivate you as a Christian, but also as a filmmaker, you've come to the right place. As a filmmaker, it's great to know what has come before us in the stories that we're looking to tell, so we can truly appreciate how the craft of filmmaking has evolved, especially in the Christian and faith space. So I'm going to be presenting my top 10 favorite faith-inspired films to watch, and hopefully they will motivate you not just as a believer, but also as a filmmaker. So let's get into the list. So a quick prerequisite that I'm going to be putting on each of the films that I select are: 1, they are a film that I have seen; 2, I'm kind of basing my choices on not only are they faith-based, where they have a strong God component to their storyline, but also I'm kind of rating them in terms of overall how well they deliver their story, deliver on their message, but also just how it looks as a film in general. And that's the thing that you're going to hear me often saying, is that how well they told the story. Not just was it a good story, but how well was it done technically, because I think as Christians and as filmmakers, we always need to be looking to advance our technical game, because for the longest time that was the biggest knock against faith-based films, is that we didn't have as good technical specs. The lighting wasn't as good, acting, story, camera work, like just everything was just not as good. And I would say over the last 10 to 15 years, we've really made great strides in that arena. So that's going to be part of the criteria that I'm going to be looking at these films that I recommend you watch. So let's get right into the list. I think this is probably the granddaddy of them all that kind of kicked off the modern Christian films that we're looking at, and that of course is Mel Gibson's A Passion of the Christ. What's so great about Passion of the Christ is it is beautifully shot. The acting is superb, and even though it's in a different language, you are riveted by the story. You are hanging on to every bit of dialogue. And don't even get me started on the music. The music is just gorgeous. There are certain scenes that I get emotionally welled up by just because of the music. This is very much the film that showed Hollywood that there is this audience that wants these true stories of compassion, of love, of grace, redemption, of hope. So obviously, Passion of the Christ has to be on this list. If you have not watched it yet, I will warn you, it is very graphic because it is showing the power of Christ's love for us. It's a very emotionally raw film. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly encourage you to do so, just because from a technical film aspect, it is an experience unto its own. So that's the first one on my list. A more recent film that I'm going to recommend next is a film called War Room, which is a film that dives specifically into the power of prayer. Now, this is a film from the Kendrick brothers. It's after they've been doing this for a little while, and I feel like War Room was where pretty much all the previous films that they had done, it all came together in this one film. They had amazing acting, great locations, great camera work, and they had a powerful message that I think so many of us as believers forget, and that is the power of prayer. Prayer is the way for us to talk to God, to bring our troubles and our struggles to God, and to give them over to Him, and to surrender to His will, to His love, to His grace. And I think it recaptures something that has long been out of the conversation in church, and that's just the power of prayer. It may be a little bit much for some of you, but I think from a filmmaking perspective and inspiring story position, this is a film worth checking out. Next film I'm going to recommend is one that's definitely been popular over recent years, and they've just announced a sequel to it, and that is I Can Only Imagine, which is the story of how the infamous song I Can Only Imagine was created. And it's a really powerful message about forgiveness and how once you accept Christ, you are transformed from the inside out. And I think it does a great job of capturing that redemption story. And I love that I Can Only Imagine was not only well competently shot, but the lighting is superb. The performances by Dennis Quaid and the other actors are fantastic, but also it doesn't pull any punches with the emotional trauma that happened in the story. It doesn't pull any punches, and I think that's such a crucial thing that us as Christian filmmakers have been really kind of getting more into, is we're not shying away from the difficult topics. We're not sugarcoating it. We're not glossing over it, which again, I feel like that's kind of the accusation of films that Hallmark and Lifetime make, is that they don't get into like deeper relatable issues. They kind of gloss over real struggles that people go through, and that prevents their films from being 100% relatable. And one of the coolest things about the stories that Jesus would tell in his parables is that he brought these principles down to a relatable level with whoever his audience was, because it wasn't always just the disciples. He made relatable stories that people could hook into something that they understood, and he taught them this principle. And I think films like I Can Only Imagine really did that in a really solid way. Now, this next film might be a little old for some of you younger filmmakers out there, and I will be very specific about why you need to check this film out, and that is the original Ben-Hur movie, not the one that was made in the 2000s, but the one from 1956 starring Charlton Heston. This film is filmmaking on its most epic scale. Just from a pure filmmaking standpoint, it is an awe to behold. Just the landscapes, the size, the famous chariot race that you probably have maybe seen in your film school classes. It's filled with thousands of extras, real horses, real chariots, real stunts, and their threat of actual injury is so huge. And there's even history about how that race was done and some of the injuries that did result on that set. But the film's message is just as powerful as the scale of its filmmaking, and it is about this core concept of forgiveness over revenge. And it all takes place over the lifespan of Jesus. And that character weaves in and out of the story every once in a while, but they really don't bring any attention to that. It's all about the character of Ben-Hur and his quest for vengeance for the wrongs done upon him and his family. And over the course of the film, he learns the power of forgiveness. And by the end, he is made new. He releases that anger. He releases that desire for vengeance for something more. And that is hope. And it's just such a powerfully made film. The message is powerful. The technical skills involved to make this movie are something to behold. Again, for you younger filmmakers out there, this is a film you have to check out just to appreciate the magnitude of what this film was able to accomplish. Next film on my list is going to be one that you maybe not have heard of. It's a little bit more recent, but it's called An Interview with God. And that is where a newspaper columnist is invited to have a conversation with God and actually ask God questions for his news article. And the role of supposedly God, the Father, is played to perfection by David Strathairn. And the dialogue is so crisp, so on point. And what I love about this film is it's a simple premise. The journey that the human character goes through, try to understand, is this really God who I'm talking to? And the way that Strathairn plays the character, and he kind of walks that delicate balance of being all-knowing and kind of asking questions to questions he's given. The script and the actors really walk that tightrope really well. And I think what I liked about this film is that it reminds us that it's okay to ask questions of God in prayer, in small group, in partnership with your pastor, or just when you're having your one-on-one time with God. It's okay to ask questions. And it can be the hardest of hard questions. God says in his word, bring these things to me so that I may unburden you of that, and so that our relationship can get deeper and your trust in me can get deeper. And I think that was what this film reminded me of, is that it's okay to bring these questions before him. And I think this film just did a great job of capturing that truth that a lot of us just kind of forget about. The next film up is a very recent release, and that is The Blind, which is the original story of Phil Robertson, who went on to create Duck Commander, which from there we got the famous Duck Dynasty and the family that came with it. And what I loved about how this story was is, again, it was a film that did not shy away from the dark realities of where Phil Robertson was with all his addictions and where the struggle was with his family. His family had to let him go. They released him, but they never stopped praying for him. And this is a great story about the power of forgiveness and, again, the transforming redemptive power once you accept Christ into your heart. And Phil has often said this on his podcast and every one of his speaking events. He was about as dark and as ugly as a human being as you could get. And the fact that God transformed him, and through that, his family all followed in faith, and they were all able to establish this amazing, impactful, dynamic family through their shows, through their talks, their podcasts. They had such an impact on our culture these days that it all came from one little duck call, and for Phil finally surrendering to the forgiveness and the grace that God offers. And the fact that the family went to making this film and they said, we don't want to sugarcoat or shy away from any of us. We have to show it all. I thought that was such a amazing admission of, like, we were not always like this. For a while it was very dark and it could have gone the other way. So I applaud what this film did. Again, technically looks great, but the message and the transferring power of redemption is so strong in this one. Okay, next one up, just to get it a little bit lighter, is actually an earlier Erwin Brothers film that I personally just happen to really enjoy, is the film called A Mom's Night Out. Now, the main focus of this film is just some hijinks that some very exhausted moms trying to take one night off from their families, and they get into some crazy hijinks. You would think it's a very simple premise that's just kind of meant to be like a fun family comedy, but I feel like it's so much more than that. And this was the genius that I think the Erwin Brothers tapped into when they made this film, is they cast it amazingly well. Like, it's just a knockout cast from Sarah Drew, Patricia Heaton, Sean Astin, even Trace Adkins turns in a really memorable performance as this muscular biker, but he still has this heart of gold. It's just a really well casted film, and I love the layers to the story, because yes, it's about these moms who are just tired and they just need a night off, but what they discover throughout all that is how blessed they are to have these amazing families, to have these healthy kids. And I like that this film highlights the importance of the role of mom. There's a lot of films out there that stress the importance of the father in kids' lives, but I love that this film specifically gave moms the front spotlight. And it's just a really well done film. I think it struck that right balance of, like, having great comedic moments and performances, but also knowing when to lean into the serious. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit on the lighter fare, because I know a lot of these films have been sort of on the heavier side, I would definitely recommend Mom's Night Out. Would make for a great romantic movie or a great date movie if you're in that aspect of your relationship. So worth checking out. All right, the next film is called Paul, Apostle of Christ. Now, this was done, again, more recently. And why you're seeing a lot of films that have come out in the last 15 years or so is because I feel like we've really just stepped up our game in terms of, like, the depth of the stories that we're doing, the kind of acting talent that we're attracting to our projects. And again, just the technical proficiency that we're really now bringing to these projects. And Paul, an Apostle of Christ, is no exception to that. Great acting, brought Jim Caviezel back into a biblical story, this time as Luke instead of Jesus from his role in The Passion. And the actor that they cast to play Paul is amazing. He's kind of got this gritty realism that when I read Paul's letters, I always imagine this kind of a persona, is that he's gritty, he's rugged, he's got this take charge attitude, and, like, when he speaks, it's not necessarily that he's loud, but he has authority in every word he says. And the thing I also really liked about this movie is that it didn't shy away from the reality that the early church was facing. There were crucifixions. Christians were being hunted down, first originally by Paul, which we see in flashbacks, but then the Roman Empire was hunting down this movement because it was trying to squash it before it expanded beyond the Roman Empire. And one of the main leaders of this movement was Paul. And there's great scenes where Luke and Paul are arguing while Paul is in prison about why should we be suffering this? Like, we should just condemn the Roman Empire, condemn the Romans and all the atheists out there, the disbelievers out there, and just give them over to God's vengeance and God's justice. And Paul makes this great argument of like, that's not it. It's about love for all mankind. God sent Christ for everyone. And he took the consequences of our sin for everyone. And that's the point of Paul's letters, and that is the point that this film is making, is that Paul wants everyone to understand that Christ's love is unconditional. We just merely have to accept it. And because Christ extended that free gift to us, we are to extend that to other people when we are wronged. And the fact that Paul is continuing this perseverance, even while he is in prison, he's keeping this attitude. And if you read his story in the Bible, you'll see that he is constantly beaten, starving. He's sometimes pronounced dead. He's shipwrecked, and all the matter of terrible things happen to him. But he keeps persevering. He keeps going because he knows God's calling on his life. And I think that's a great message for us as believers and as filmmakers to latch on to, is that this is an industry where you have to keep persevering. You have to keep working, keep pushing, keep making films, because you never know which one is going to break through. And if this is God's calling on your life, then this is what you need to keep doing. And this film just delivers that message so well. All right, this is going to be my last one. Now, I'm going to give this a little bit of an asterisk because technically it started off as a show, but they've done theatrical screenings of their episodes, and they basically have played like movies. And that, of course, is The Chosen. We started off this episode with Jesus, so it seems only fitting that we end this episode with Jesus. Now, I'm putting The Chosen on here because they have released majority of their seasons now in theaters. Some of the episodes have been bundled together, and it has made for like a 2.5, sometimes a 3-hour long movie. And the reasons I'm including this is I feel like this is a great snapshot of where we are right now as filmmakers of faith. The Chosen is a great example of great acting, great cinematography, great production design, great score, great business sense and marketing for how they've been able to expand the reach of the show to now multiple countries, multiple languages. And the fact that people outside the Christian audience space know of this show. And that's, I think, what we're always trying to get to with our projects. That's our goal, is, we want our films, yes, to find the Christian and family-friendly audience, but we want to expand to people who have not necessarily opened up the Bible before or heard the Word of God. And I think that's the goal for all of us, is that we want to bring new people into this message of hope. We want them to hear that powerful message of salvation. And if our project maybe is the gateway project that gets them to ask a question that maybe leads them to going to a Bible study, going to church, or going into the Bible on their own, that's, I think, one of our goals as Christian storytellers. I feel like that's the higher calling on us as filmmakers, is to tell these stories that hopefully reach people and reach them with the love and the hope that Christ offers us. And so, besides all the obvious things with The Chosen, I think the one thing that I love about this show is that it gives these characters of the Bible flaws. And that doesn't necessarily come across all the time if you read the scriptures or in how other portrayals have had of the disciples, but I love that it shows the disciples and the people who are following Jesus, they are flawed, they get confused by what he's saying, they get angry with each other, they have resentment, they're trying to jockey for position, they're letting their own egos get in the way, and they're struggling with, like, what is our role here? What is our role going to be with him? What is our role going to be after he's gone? And it gives us what I would say is probably the most relatable screen portrayal of Jesus that I can remember seeing. I've watched a fair amount of portrayals of Jesus over the years, being raised in the church and everything. But what I love is how they try to find that balance of Jesus being Christ in human form. He is the Son of God, but they're also trying to make sure they balance it with it is God in a human form. He can laugh, he gets hungry, he makes jokes, he gets frustrated with his disciples when they're not getting a lesson he's trying to get into them. Or what we just saw recently in season 4, and we're going to see probably even more in season 5, I'm guessing, is that he gets frustrated, he gets angry, righteously angry, and he takes action. And I love that they've brought this accessibility, this believability to both Jesus and to the disciples. And again, it's reached younger audiences where teenagers and college-age kids are getting into this show because they can find their way through one of the disciples that's struggling with something that they've struggled with. And same thing with adults. Adults can connect with the disciples and their struggles. And that's, to me, that's great storytelling because you're giving people accessible points of entry. And when your project is doing that, I think that gives you the best opportunity to reach audiences and to connect with them and to inspire them. And then that leads them to the ultimate truth. And that's that Jesus is here for them, to forgive them, to restore them, to raise them up, to be with them in whatever struggles they're dealing with. And I feel like that's the importance and the power of film. And for me, that's one of the reasons I love doing what I'm doing. So if you haven't checked out any of these films, I highly encourage you to do so. Just because they're faith-based, don't write them off, especially because nowadays where we're at from a professional standpoint, we're right in the thick of it now. And again, we got new shows and new movies coming out all the time that just keep raising the bar. So give these a chance. And if you have any films that I may have missed that you want me to maybe discuss in another episode, feel free to leave a comment down below. Or if you want to see another list, I would love to hear what those ideas would be. So I will look for those in the comments. And until the next episode, keep the faith and keep on filmmaking.